We blessed the rains down in Imola. It seemed like the luck was all over the place for the drivers today. Some were spinning out, and some were rising to glory in this race. This is of course the show where we put all the races in the 2021 season calendar up against each other, ranking them on our excitement, the racing, and the drama that takes place. If you are new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. If you are enjoying this video, hit that like button, it helps support this channel. Now, normally we would go straight into the first half, but we had a lot of excitement happening just before when the cars were trying to get to the starting grid.
You had Alonso go off the track and run wide. You had Stroll saying his brakes were on fire and needed to get that fixed. Seb, unfortunately, same issue, had to start from the pit lane. And as Valtteri was making his way around, he gets told that he has a rear left puncture. And then Charles spinning off on the formation lap, but luckily able to regain his place.
And getting into the start of this race, Max Verstappen took off like a rocket. Perez was already dropping off, getting caught up in the mist. Hamilton and Verstappen go into turn one side by side. They touch a little bit, but it ends up going to Max Verstappen, who takes the lead from this point onward. Hamilton ended up getting a bit of damage on his front wing, but it didn't really seem to impact him that much going forward.
It didn't take long though before you started seeing drivers running wide. You had Charles going off into the grass at one point, his teammate followed a few turns later, and then of course we already had an incident between Latifi where he crashed, and unfortunately that was the end of his race right from the get-go. Typically when a safety car comes out, things slow down, not as eventful, but not in this case. We saw Perez run off the track. He went wide into the gravel, but when he went back onto the track, instead of following suit, he decided he wanted to regain the two positions that he had lost to other vehicles. So he overtook them under the safety car. Slam dunk penalty. I think all of us saw that coming a mile away.
Imola is becoming a track that's getting a reputation of having incidents happen behind the safety car, and we saw this again with Mick. Mick was trying to warm up his tires, but he ended up losing control and crashing into the barrier. Fortunate for him, he just lost his front wing. However, because he crashed right at the pit exit, the pit lane ended up being closed, so he had to trail around a broken front wing for a few laps until it opened up, just as the safety car was ending. 6 laps end up passing by, and we get racing once again.
Max gets another great start, but I'm more interested in what is going on in the midfield. You had some amazing battles taking place between Carlos and Gasly. Ricciardo was in the mix a little bit as well there too.
At that same time, we were also watching the battle between Hamilton and Leclerc. It was great to see the Ferrari and Mercedes going up against each other, except in this case, it was only for second place.
One of my absolute favorite overtakes was when Gasly, Norris, and Carlos went 3 wide into the corner. I was on the edge of my seat. Who was gonna come out on top? It was just gripping, wheel-to-wheel racing, and I absolutely love to see it. And I think that is one of the best aspects about old school tracks like this. There is no room for error.
And while this is happening, Perez ends up having a 10-second stop and go penalty. He's having problems with his steering wheel, so it looks like the whole game of strategy that Red Bull was looking to play in this situation against Hamilton wasn't falling through exactly how they planned.
And speaking of strategy, we saw an interesting dynamic of team orders when Lando had asked to be let in front of Daniel because he wanted to see his raw pace in clear air. Lando clearly had better pace, Daniel still getting accustomed to the car. McLaren absolutely made the right decision by letting him pass. I mean, it reflects in the race results. And then we saw another 10-second time penalty, this time handed to Vettel because his tires were not fitted before the 5-minute warning mark ahead of the race. The thing is though, we all knew that was coming, so I don't know what took the stewards so long before giving him this penalty. It kind of just seemed to screw up the flow of his race and his strategy.
A few laps later, Max was the first one to bite and switching over to the medium compound, and Mercedes had to react, trying to go for that undercut, but it didn't end up working out for them as they had a much slower pit stop than Red Bull's team. So everyone ends up switching over to the medium tires, but what ends up happening is there's a few more driver errors and spins to follow.
Probably the most shocking one being when Hamilton went to go past George. All of a sudden, Hamilton runs wide, he's off in the gravel, he kind of taps the barrier, and we're thinking at this point, oh my god, he's stuck, he's out of the race. What are the implications for Red Bull and the Constructors' Championship? But alas, Lewis is able to somehow reverse and get going again. He was stationary for roughly a minute and a half, which on a track like this would be so substantial.
He ends up having to trail his car all the way back to the pit lane, but there's something significant to happen here that really helps out his luck.
The camera cuts back and suddenly there is debris flying all the way over the track. You see a Mercedes and a Williams crashed off into the gravel. What on earth just happened? It was a little bit confusing, but ultimately it seemed like Valtteri was somewhat defending the position. George thought he had the inside line for the overtake, probably dipped his wheel ever so slightly into the grass, and he just shunted into the side of Valtteri. Both of them knocked out of the race. Drivers clearly very upset with each other.
You'll have to let us know down in the comment section who you think is to blame in this situation. Of course, with the amount of debris on the track, a red flag comes out here. Like we said, it's a fortunate event for some of the drivers, such as Hamilton. He's now able to recuperate himself after his crash. You have Sergio, who had to serve his 10-second penalty, no longer a factor now, and we're gonna have another start to this race. However, it's behind the safety car.
But before we get back into that second start of this race, we have to score this very chaotic first half. So Chris, what do you have for us?
My excitement was up at a 7. I was really engaged with the battle I was seeing at the front. That opening lap was great. The wet race, how can that not get you excited? In terms of the driving, I ended up scoring it a 6, which, bear with me, might be a bit low. That was mostly because most of the racing was happening in the back of the field as the gaps at the front were so substantial. In terms of the drama, I scored this a 9. You had something new being thrown at you every lap, it seemed like. Drivers were spinning out, crashes, very experienced drivers making mistakes. Scoring my first half a 7.3. I'm gonna round that up to a 7.5 for just how chaotic this first half was.
I think I was a little bit more generous, I won't lie. I did have my excitement up at a 9. With having so many spinouts, it just kept you wondering what could happen at the front, what's gonna happen in the midfield. This entire race could have been turned upside down in the blink of an eye. Which it did. For the racing, I did score it a little bit higher than you at a 7. This is just because the quality was a little bit off for me with having so many spins. But ultimately, some of the overtakes we were seeing were so fascinating. Having 3 going into one corner, having cars that you typically don't see against each other going really hard into every single turn. And then for drama, I'm sorry, how can I not score this a 10? There was just so much that happened in this first half of the race. Between the rain, Perez just kind of having all hell break loose for him, and then having Hamilton run wide. He never makes mistakes, so that immediately just brings up the drama here, and then to immediately have that followed by a massive crash. Once again, very happy the drivers are okay, but oh my god, like that was so gripping. So that brings my overall score for the first half at roughly an 8.5.
So a chaotic first half of this race, building up our anticipation for the second half. Now, just before we get into that, we do have a special shout out for this video.
If you're like us and you're always wanting to add more F1 merchandise to your collection, maybe you want a new phone case, maybe you want some new posters, go check out Formula Merch Store.
They offer worldwide shipping, they got a ton of different accessories to choose from, so be sure to check out the link in our description and use code CCF1 for 10% off. So getting back into the race now, we're in the second half, the cars are behind the safety car, however the conditions are still very unpredictable.
You have Kimi spinning out behind the safety car, once again he's still able to get going, but I think the biggest shocker here is that Max almost lost control of the car. You kind of saw him slide sideways.
He regains control of his car just in time to get the race started once again. Gets a great getaway, but there's another driver that stands out, and that's Lando Norris.
Lando pretty much immediately gets the jump on Charles, a risky strategy move from McLaren to put him on soft tires, but it sure did pay off.
It's pretty much smooth sailing at this point for Max. He ends up carrying on with the lead, getting quite a substantial gap.
So as Hamilton is continuously making his way through the field, he's able to get past Stroll and Ricciardo pretty easily, but once he got up to racing against Charles, this is where things started getting a little bit more tricky for him.
It's also to note that Charles ended up having DRS from Norris, which was helping him stay out in front to defend off Lewis.
But once Charles dropped out of that DRS zone, it was pretty much a shoo-in for Hamilton to breeze past him, and then he was on the hunt for Norris.
But with Lando pushing his tires to the absolute limit and Hamilton being on fresher tires, he ended up passing him in a breeze with still a couple of laps left to go in this race. And with that, Verstappen ends up scoring his first ever win in Italy. Hamilton scores second place, with Lando finishing off in third with McLaren. And so now it is time to score the second half of this race. Cass, I pass it to you.
My excitement did go down a little bit. I rated it at a 6 because there was still some cool stuff happening out on track. But once again, Max was far ahead. He was comfortably in the lead. It was cool to be able to see Hamilton weaving his way through the crowd. I think it would have been a little bit more exciting had we not had a safety car restart. Racing and drama, I both scored at a 7. Still good stuff happening out there. It just wasn't quite as high quality as we were treated in the first half of this race. With the drama, of course, it wasn't going to be quite as elevated, but we still did see some shocking events, notably with Vettel retiring on the last lap of the race. Where did that come from? It was still chaotic, just not quite as much as the first half. So when combining my scores from the second half, this brings it to a 6.6. I'll round that up to a 6.75.
In terms of my excitement for the second half, I ended up scoring it a 6. I was really interested to see how the start of the second half of this race was going to go, especially with Lando getting such a great jump. In terms of the driving, it feels kind of weird because I did put them on par with the first half. A lot of the passes here were coming from Hamilton, like you said, and they were always in the same spot. It was just a question of which lap it was going to happen on. But like you said, there was a lot of great defending, which we don't necessarily always see at some tracks, so I gave my points to that. In terms of the drama, I scored it a 6. Like we said, you had Max almost losing it at the restart, you had drivers still spinning, there was a lot of question of who was going to take that second place and then that third place, and you end up with an unconventional podium at the end of this race. When you put my scores together, it comes out to a 5.6, I'll round that up to a 5.75. So when you combine both of our scores together, you get the final total score for the Imola Grand Prix of 2021 at a 7.25. Here's how it compares to the other races this season. We're going to be back here in 2 weeks' time for the race in Portugal, and you'll have to tune into the next race review to see how we score it. Don't forget to let us know also down in the comment section how you viewed this race.
Once again, we'd like to give a shout out to Formula Merch Store. Make sure to check out that link in the description. Follow us on social media to keep the conversation going, and we will see you next time. Bye!